Welcome to the Healthy Home Show. I'm your host, Fernanda Furman, a healthy home architect.
Hi, I'm Eric Furman, healthy home contractor.
And today we're here with Corinne Segura. Thank you so much for being here and joining us in this project. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
Thanks so much. Looking forward to it.
So one of the things, we're going to read her biography, but one of the things that got us excited about having Corinne here in the show is the fact that she has her journey. It's a journey that many of us have been going through, and sometimes we don't know how to identify what's going on with us. And because of what she was going from, she was suffering from multiple chemical sensitivities. She decided to build her own tiny home, and that's a solution that a lot of people are looking for when trying to run away from mold. And it's one of the main solutions that people are looking for out there when they need to move to a new home. So Corinne is going to share with us today her experience, how she got there, and also she's going to share with us all of the things that worked and didn't work when building a healthy, tiny home. So Eric is going to read your biography, and then we're going to start with the questions.
All right. So Corinne is a certified building biologist with 6 years of experience helping folks create healthy homes. Her unique experience lies in her deep dives into the chemical composition of off-gassing of materials that will be suitable for even the most extremely mold and chemically sensitive. Having environmental sensitivities herself and learning from what works for most of the sensitive people helps to inform people in her practice. She works in collaboration with building science experts to make sure building or remodeling or redecoration is done in a mold preventative way. Her website, mychemicalfreehouse.net, is a guide to building materials. It also contains information on choosing healthy trailers, RVs, camping equipment, and simply small homes like prefabs. She helps folks choose between housing options and evaluate healthy housing in person through photo evaluations. She believes deeply in the need to avoid mold in order to heal from chemical sensitivities and related illnesses. Therefore, mold avoidance and mold-safe housing is always top priority. Currently, she lives in Vancouver, Canada, and you can see her. We'll put the links down below. She's got a YouTube channel. And also you can find her on Facebook as well to see the latest posts, videos, and updates about locations, materials, and companies building safe homes. So welcome to the show. This is a great topic that we've been waiting for. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
So would you start telling the audience, how did you get into, to the tiny home? What was your past experience with chemicals, multiple chemical sensitive, and maybe tell the audience, some of us are feeling that, but we don't know what to look for when we start having the symptoms.
Yeah, my main diagnosis was chronic fatigue syndrome, and multiple chemical sensitivities often comes with that. Mold is often one of the underlying factors that complicates things. So I built the tiny house definitely out of necessity. I was not able to find safe housing. I mean, everything, when you become really, really ill from mold and chemical sensitivities, you either have off-gassing or you have cleaning products, like when you're going to look at places or they've newly been painted or there's mold, it becomes really hard to find housing. And so it was a house out of necessity. Of course, you don't have to buy land, it's less expensive, it's smaller. It seemed, like a faster option. At the time, it was the very beginning of the tiny house movement. So there wasn't even as much information as there is now. So I think now there's a lot more information to help make these decisions, because I think sometimes when you're really sick, you rush into a decision. And that, it did save me. It gave me that stability of a few years of healing. But in the end, the house failed due to the builder's mistakes that led to mold. I decided to then become a building biologist, take the house apart, do like a forensic evaluation on what happened. And that's how I became really passionate about okay, sure, you can pick all the best building materials and they'll be, zero off-gassing or close to it and really healthy, and every finish was chosen by me carefully, and those parts were really good for me. But with time, houses fail from the defects. Um, so we have to have both those points. We can't just choose healthy materials and then leave it there. And so I've never been able since then to just leave that part of the equation.
Got it. Would you be willing to share with us, like, what, I mean, you said the builder, but what elements happened to the home that made it unsafe for you to live there exactly?
Yeah, I mean, and this is common in tiny house companies, but it's not that it's uncommon in regular houses. When I go look now at regular houses being built, there's a lot of defects. So my builder left, I don't want to make it too like complicated or detailed. Um, he did the bathroom ceiling wrong, so there was condensation above and there was mold growing there. There was mold. A building on top of a trailer is tricky because you have a metal base, so there was condensation under. I'm just going to simplify a little. He made some plumbing mistakes. There were 3 different leaks. There was a long list. The wheel wells are really tricky because that's another metal area. So a lot of people think like they're trying to build, whether it's a trailer or shelter or even a home, they think, oh, metal, I'm just going to go with metal, I'm really, really done with mold. But metal creates all these tricky areas of condensation, and unless you just have metal and you don't have any insulation or anything else, you could have some really tricky areas of condensation. So those were some of the areas that were specifically done wrong and led to mold over just a few years.
Just a few years. Wow. So it happened that fast. One of the things I see, so I did go and look at the home, and it's hard to see just from pictures, but seems like ventilation or dehumidification can help a little bit. Obviously, if you got a leak or these things, and not just ventilation, but the right amount to cure these things. So do you think there's definitely a building error, or was there maybe some issues with ventilation as well? Because that's something I get concerned with in a tiny home, is they don't have proper ventilation, especially in Canada or some place where you're going to need to have it closed up a little bit more throughout the year.
Luckily, I live in one of the most ideal climates. I have a video on why outdoor humidity doesn't matter, and it's a little bit of a, just a title to kind of grab the attention on that topic, because humidity doesn't matter when it's winter humidity, because it's cold air, and when you bring that in and you heat it, your humidity is going to stay really low. So I have 10%. I don't know if you can see it. My humidity right now, it's really hot in here, so that does change things, but my humidity is 10%. So this is not my tiny house, this is a condo, but my tiny house never had high humidity. It's good to have a humidity meter. They're really cheap, so you can check that. You can check your humidity. I almost always had a window cracked. I now know a lot more, and I think everybody needs to know about how their ventilation system works, because if you don't know that when you turn on the exhaust fan over the stove or over the bath, that needs makeup air, like that, you have to know the whole system, and it's different in different places. So I can't just simplify, oh, when you turn on the stove, then you do this, because every place is different. So that wasn't a problem in the tiny house, to get the long way back to that question. It was really building defects, and condensation, really gets through walls and is one of the biggest problems in buildings that I've seen.
Yeah. Oh, sorry to hear that. One of the other questions I had, don't want to dig too deep into a sore subject, but I think about like a real technical question, like that you invested obviously a lot of time and money into that. And is there insurance for tiny homes? I know like things like mold aren't generally covered, but like you basically had to abandon it. Is there anything you've been able to recoup from that, or is it just sitting there?
It was a pretty huge disaster. Tiny houses are, trailers or RVs, it depends, but they have a 1-year warranty.
Okay.
And most defects take more than a year to really go wrong.
Yeah.
And also when you're at a really high level of mold sensitivity, I couldn't really sue the builder, because when you're really, really sensitive, the mold, I have pictures of the mold above the shower, and it looks pretty minor, and it kind of looks like well, could you just not fix that? And then, but then I would have to, I just kept fixing everything after everything after everything. And eventually I disclosed and sold for a very low price, lost a huge amount of money. And that is like another, definitely like a passion point of helping people choose safe housing, because it's not just a matter of, oh, okay, that didn't work, let's try another one. It's like, if you're putting your whole savings into a house and it fails in that way with a 1-year warranty and no land that you own, right? So you don't get to recoup very much, then it's a huge loss to your health. There's a huge loss from that builder.
Yeah.
Right. So what materials did you choose? Because as you're saying, it was not the materials that was a failure. So you chose the right materials, but what was the failure was putting together how the build was put together. So in that manner, I want to say that there is possibilities of building a tiny home that is healthy and that doesn't have those issues, right? So what was your take? We heard a lot about prefabs, and I actually shared one of your posts in our Facebook group, because that's one of the ways that we also build in Brazil. We also use prefab. What were the building materials that you chose for your tiny home? So if somebody that has chemical sensitivities or running away from mold, if they want to build their own home, what would you suggest them to use?
Yeah, so at the time, this was a lot more of a alternative thing to do, and that's actually why I started my chemical-free house, because I was like, why is this not on the internet? I have to do all this research, I have to buy all these books, and then I have to special order, and now all these things are so much more available. The challenge now is there's more greenwashing. So although they're more available, there's also more confusion. But I chose some of the things now I would choose differently because of the availability of products now, and even just more products, and they're easier to find. So there's a few things I would keep the same. There's a few things I would do differently. I wouldn't use MGO board again. That was a fad at the time, and all the consultants that I talked to recommended it, and it wasn't terrible, but it did crack. So it was good for me in terms of health-wise. I felt good. I did clay plaster walls, which I felt was really healthy. And if you can ever afford to do plaster, it's just a wonder. It just gives like a wonderful feeling, natural feeling to a room. And what else would I keep the same? Solid, real wood floors. Hard to go wrong with real wood floors, except that in a tiny house, they do tend to crack. So I wouldn't do that in a tiny house again, but I would use real wood floors, like in a regular house. I think that's always a good choice. I used hemp oil, which was a really unusual thing to do at the time, and it hasn't really been tested. And that's why I do a lot of testing of materials now too, and look at how and other people's experience of how they're even holding up, because it's a really big risk to just try a material that hasn't been used. It was a big risk to try MGO. Even hemp oil was sort of like, are my floors even going to hold up? So those are a few of the materials, just to touch on a few.
Do you think that would be different? Because you said you built the house on the wheels, right? Do you think it would be different if the house was built on the location that would not be moved?
Yeah, in that sense, you wouldn't worry as much about things cracking. So it wouldn't be a problem using either MGO. If you still wanted to use MGO, you can. There are some better brands now that seem to be holding up a little better. You could certainly just use regular drywall. I mean, regular drywall is very safe. And then real wood floors wouldn't have that cracking. So there's a few things that complicate anything on wheels, and I would say usually simplify. The part that's more complicated on a foundation is the foundation. That's the only part that you've kind of eliminated, is that slabs, basement, crawls are all often made, with defects, and often have water coming towards them, or taking in water, or are somehow, usually taking in water.
So now you are in a different living space. Do you think you would attempt, knowing what you know now, going back to a tiny home at some point, or some variation of that?
I'm really liking regular apartments. It's actually very small. It's almost a tiny house, but it's an apartment. I'm enjoying renting. I think if for people that haven't owned before, there's a lot you have to take care of. And if you have mold sensitivities, there's a lot of maintenance. There's a lot of things you have to take care of on a home. I do have an article about a passive house, tiny house, and it was really built just really meticulously. It's a really cool house. It's a really detailed article, so it's really for people that really want to go down that road and learn about it. But that's the kind of house I would build if I was building another tiny house. I think it's still a cool idea. I still don't own land, so I think it's still very possible. My dream, though, is to get into prefab manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of people that are renting, and we are getting a lot of emails as well, people saying, what do I do if I rent? I can't do, there is this idea that if you rent, there's nothing you can do about. So you're saying that you're renting, and what have been the things that you've been doing to make sure you were safe inside of a rental?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's really relevant for right now. I do have some YouTube videos where I do some tours of rentals and B&Bs, but the B&Bs are the same types of places you would look at for rentals. The kinds of things I look at, things are improving, at least in the Vancouver area, and I'm sure in other major cities. Like there's no smoking allowed in the building, so people can't smoke on their balcony. They can't even smoke right outside the building so that it comes up to your balcony. The dryer vents vent to the roof. So for people that are very sensitive to the fumes of other people's not so healthy laundry products, venting to the roof is a really great thing to look for. So I have a number of things that I look for. Obviously, off-gassing, I'm looking at the materials, I'm looking at kind of that sweet spot of the age. But yeah, when something goes wrong, and there's a leak right now in my roof, and I've put in notice, because I've been through this before. Not only am I not the owner, but even if I was the owner of the condo, I don't own the roof. I don't have control, very, very little control over how quickly. I mean, that's been going on for 3 weeks. I have it under limited containment. I've looked in the wall, there's no mold, so don't worry too much. But but I know that they haven't found the source of the leak. And they're probably not even close to finding the source of it. And are they even going to fix it properly when they do find the source? I think there's just a very small detail done wrong in the flashing of the roof. It's not super obvious. It's not like, oh, well, a shingle fell off and, and here's the leak. It's very subtle. And so you can't really count on, and I often say, don't stay on this top floor, which I really will take my own advice next time.
On the top floor?
Because of the roof leaks. But you know what, on lower floors of an apartment, someone's shower is leaking, you don't have much control over that. You have to go convince them to fix their shower properly. You have limited control. So I just give notice if there's a problem, move on.
So I guess from what I'm hearing, the first thing is finding a housing that it's safe from the beginning, from the construction point of view. There's, things are done right. And then always keep on the lookout if something goes wrong with the building, being knowledgeable about things that could go wrong. For example, water leak, what to look for. Like, for example, look on the ceiling. If you see a little, water spot, a yellow spot on your ceiling, that could be a reason that, that will show you that there could be a leak on the floor above. So I think that's a great idea for some of the people that can't build, can buy. So thank you so much for sharing that. And you mentioned prefab. Would you tell us like the pros and cons of building with the prefab?
Oh, it's a really long article that I have on prefabs because I found it was such a complex topic, because there could be a lot of pros with certain companies building outside of the rain, precision cuts in the factory, possibly highly trained workers in the factory who only work on those houses or that brand or that factory, and just a lot of control. In the really good companies, a lot of control. You still have to get that to the site. You still have to put it together properly. You still have to build the foundation right. And so you still have some of the usual challenges of supervision and making sure it's done right. In terms of the cons, in some of them, so there's so many different types of prefabs, but in the ones that come, semi-complete or complete, you may have less choice in the materials. And that could just be a deal breaker for healthy materials for many people. On a lot of them, you can finish the inside yourself though. So there's just such a variety of ways of doing it. But on the con side, if it's not a great company that doesn't have good supervision, you may have less control because they're making it, you're not at the factory there with them. Whereas if you built everything from scratch on site, you could be there every day, or you could hire a good supervisor, or you could hire someone to really be there every day.
Yeah, I'm going to put the link to that article below your interview as well.
Something that you mentioned, this has come up a bit, and for the general listener, they're not going to know what the Building Biology Center is, Institute, and the certificates. Can you tell us what prompted you to do that, and then what certificate did you get, and then how are you able to use that to help people?
Yeah, they have a few different types. The one I have actually now is they've changed the names of the different courses, but they have some now where there's a new home build consultant, and there's I forget what the other one's called, but so some building biologists come to your house and they test out, and a lot of them are very interested in the EMFs, and they'll do testing. They might even do mold testing or VOC testing. But I wanted to further my knowledge in the field to help other people primarily choose healthy materials. And from there, I've been expanding more into other building science courses, just because even just choosing materials, you still have to know how they fit in a basement. Like if somebody wants a healthy insulation for their basement or their attic, that ties into the entire moisture management system and mold prevention. So I can't just say, oh, just this insulation or this one because it's healthy. It's like everything ties in together. So that's what I wanted to learn about so that I could really be a help with both those sides.
Yeah, that's so important, because what we're seeing is like there are a lot of professionals that are very good at what they do, but they have this knowledge. And there's another professional that has this knowledge. But when you're trying to build a healthy home, you really need to have somebody that understands the building as a whole, so that when you're putting, all the materials, as you're saying, you choose a healthy material, but how is that going to be, interacting with the rest of the house and the location? And yeah, so there's so much that goes into that just choosing healthy materials is not enough. And I love what you just said. Now, going back to the tiny homes, what is that, like the legality that you see, like the issues in terms of getting permits? Is there, any permits? I'm just gonna relay to you like all the questions that we have been getting. People want to know, do I need to get a permit? Is there an inspection that needs to be done? Is that like the same as building a real home?
So there's a few different ways, and I don't focus on this aspect as much because a lot of it, I only focus where it ties into materials or how it might impact your building strategy. So if you do the RVIA certification, so it becomes certified as an RV, you could park it in an RV park. They do have building codes similar to houses, and sometimes those could be in your way of what you want to do. Last time I looked at it, it required an interior vapor barrier. And in many climates, that would be an absolute no for mold. If you use AC, you could easily have condensation behind an interior vapor barrier. So honestly, I haven't looked at that in a while. I don't usually focus too much on, and I don't actually have many people building that do RVIA certified, but if we did, we would look at that again and we would see what the updated code is. So a lot of people just don't want to do that. They have a more freedom to do whatever they want. But then there are really no codes. You could easily build a tiny house with no standards. And that's why so many of them are going badly and going wrong. And the builders are not the best builders. They're not the top builders, because the top builders are building really nice houses. They're working with good architects. And they're just building better houses or bigger houses. I haven't seen sometimes you can convince a really good builder, an architect, to work with you on your tiny house, but they don't own a tiny house company. I haven't seen that happen yet, that a really good builder and architect, are the forefront of a tiny house company.
Good point. I love hearing the challenges. So the people that are right now, taking in consideration to build a tiny home, they need all the things that they need to actually think about and plan ahead before they pull the trigger.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned about the codes and issues. I mean, the United States alone, with hundreds of years now of building, and being from a family of builders and contractors myself, and being in the industry a lot, it's this tough balance, right? You don't want too much regulation sometimes, and it doesn't always go the right path. But like, let's say electrical, for example, and having kids now, I'm always thinking safety, safety, safety. My dad, who's an electrical contractor, said, most of the codes for electrical were made because somebody died a certain way, and so then they had to change things. So that's one of the things I get really concerned about in the wild west of enclosing yourself in a box with electricity and all these things, that you don't do more harm than good in an effort to do the right thing. Yeah. So
how do you address the electrical with the EMF exposure inside of a tiny home, since now you're so close to the walls and so close to the electrical wires?
So I would say, just going back to the codes for a second, I'm not against codes at all. I think most of them, from what I've been learning in building science courses that I'm pursuing, is they're a bare minimum standard, and they're certainly better than, most of them are helpful and better than not following the codes. But there's just those few that I mentioned, like sometimes there'll be an interior vapor barrier requirement or something that's not ideal. But with the electrical, I took some precautions, because when you're building a really safe structure, you don't always know how you're going to feel. Like, you're going to unmask. So unmask is a word of, like, when you're in, I'll start with the example of mold, and I'm going to get to chemicals and then electrical EMF. So when you're in mold for a long time, even low levels, you often don't notice it. Like, you don't smell it, you can't sense it, because you're always in it. And sometimes you go on vacation and come back, and then you're like, oh, something's wrong here. And so we call that masked. You're masked to it, and you can actually become masked to chemicals. So when I moved into the tiny house, I became way more chemically sensitive at first, as my body was trying to tell me what to avoid. Even essential oils at the time I had to avoid. My body was just telling me, no, we need to avoid all this. And so I didn't know what was going to happen when I moved there. Was I going to become sensitive to EMFs too? So I did a few precautions. I did the shielding on the wires. I had a kill switch. I had my Ethernet wired in, and I actually didn't use a cell phone. I was a little bit sensitive at first. I could feel the effects of the cell phone for the first, year. And then I sort of healed out of it. And then I didn't find any benefit of using the kill switch. But you know what? That wasn't a huge expense. If you're building, right, you might not want to take a house apart in order to put shielded cable in. But if you're building from new, you can put in these precautions just to see if that does help you.
Yeah, for us, and this is what I love, and I really wanted people to understand, is we are all different. And, some things that works for some people, they don't work for others. And that's why I love what you say, you just need to listen to your body. You need to see how your body reacts to things and have that personal relationship with your body, right? For us, the kill switch, we didn't have the kill switch, he was the kill switch. But yeah. For us, it's amazing how after 3 days, I was like, okay, maybe it's just us trying to believe that it's working, because we are so desperate for a solution that maybe it's just in our head. And then when we turn it back on, and for some of you guys that don't know what a kill switch is, I'm going to let you explain to them what we did.
In a tiny home, you probably were able to shield your wiring, but in an existing home like ours, or 99.9% of every home, it's done in a way with an unshielded electrical wire, and in the areas that you sleep, especially, or stand and work, we spend a lot of time. Those wires are emitting fields that some people notice that they disturb their sleep or interfere with their body. So basically you're shutting off the electricity in those areas, or maybe even your whole house as an experiment like we did. One of the things I was interested in is the plumbing aspect and the things that you're enjoying there that we maybe don't really think all the way through until we're actually having to deal with things like human waste, especially if there were more than one individual living in there. So
how did you deal with that, and what would you suggest or do different now?
Yeah, at the time there were very few options for composting toilets, and I definitely wanted to have that freedom to be off of out of an RV park and not hooked up to those kinds of services, or on a septic tank. So I needed to have that freedom. So now there are way better options. My toilet was just a mess, and really literally and in every way. So now there are better ones. There's the separate, and ones that separate the urine, make things way easier. And even the incinerating toilets are interesting, as long as you're not super sensitive to that. There's going to be some incineration smoke there. It's can be kind of a simpler way to deal with it. And then there's more options now. Another one that I like is this kind of complex bag system. So it kind of takes this bag, seals it all up. And of course, you've got to dispose of all the bags. There's always something you have to maintain, but there's a lot of really good options, and you'll find one that will suit like what level of maintenance you want to do on human waste.
Yeah. Some of the other basic things that we all kind of take for granted, like running water, for example, potable running water. How did you overcome that challenge in a tiny home, or what options are available to people? Let's say you're out somewhere that you don't have a well, you don't have a hookup for water. So what do you do in that?
And even the disposable of that water, the gray water.
I did hook it up to an outside faucet. I ran a PEX line that had a heat tape, which is an electrical tape that's keeping it from freezing, and then insulation over that. So it would depend on your climate there. If you were in this is not an extremely cold climate, Vancouver. This is more like Seattle. But if you were in the Arctic, you would have a lot, bigger challenges. Going off the grid completely with water is possible, but you've got to carry in all your water, and you've got to create some kind of system of where it can, kind of pour into your sink and then either pour into a tank, or sometimes just a bucket underneath. The gray water, there are some you should check your local laws, because what I was doing was a little bit just very simple. It was a huge acreage. I can't remember how many acres. It was huge. There was no risk of someone just kind of walking into my gray water accidentally. So we just had a huge pit. We tried different things of kind of covering it, and we had decided in the end that a very big pit was just fine. And that is a risk if kids or something were around there, but and it's not always legal. So you've got to check what you're able to do there.
Yeah. So from what we heard from you right now throughout this interview, there's a lot to be taken in consideration. Even though it seems like it's easy to build a tiny home and it's easier to find materials right now and resources, which is a great thing, there's a lot to be taken in consideration, especially where you're building your home, the codes where you're building, and not just the material, but how that material is going to interact with the rest of the building, the builders that are going to be putting it together, because if they don't know how they're building, it could cause more problems than being a good solution. That's why people are looking for a tiny home. And so we appreciate so much. Do you have any final words that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I guess when building a tiny house, I think that the thing to consider is that even though it's smaller, so it will take less time and it'll take less money, but it's not necessarily that much simpler. You still have to design the wall system for moisture management. You still have a ceiling, and you have a small cavity areas that have to be well controlled for moisture.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the metal base that I talked about. That's really tricky to manage that building up on metal without any condensation. So there's a lot of thought that has to go in there. Even your ventilation system, you should spend a little more time than what I thought in my easy climate with really low humidity. You know, a lot of people are using the tiny air exchangers, and that's a good idea. So there's a lot of things, there's a lot to learn, and I would bring on an architect, and I absolutely would, you know, hire building science experts like architects, and I can help obviously with material selection and making sure that that's going to work with the system, going to work with extreme sensitivities even, or just filtering through kind of that overwhelm of just all this information right now on materials. And some of it is, it's almost harder to sift through in a way now, I think, with what's out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how, just one final tip too on the analysis paralysis term we keep coming up with, you just mentioned right there. How are you helping people overcome that? Because at some point you've got to pull the trigger and make a decision.
Yeah, I never push anyone in, you know, my coaching, and I do coaching for, you know, mold avoidance, like if you want to get out of mold, and if you want to try a camping sabbatical, or if you even want to try like an RV for a while so that you can just get out of housing for a while, or build a tiny house, or do you want to build like a tiny little prefab? So there's a lot of choices, and I know it can be overwhelming. I don't push people, but I help people through the problem solving of that, so that they can, and I kind of get people to write things down and organize the ideas for the plan, whether that's you know, the choice between building a small house and our RV, for, you know, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to write down my summary of kind of what I heard, and the pros and cons, and where I think they should look to next. Because what you might be missing is, okay, did you consider the devaluation of the tiny home in your plan? Or did you consider whatever it is, you know, the long-term aspect of this plan, or the short-term aspect? Or, you know, of course, I would encourage people to, if you are in mold, to get out as soon as you can. I mean, don't look panic and like, oh, I gotta go today, but like, the sooner you can get out, the better. And even if that means you go to a hotel that, you know, is, hopefully we choose a good hotel that's been carefully, you know, vetted or analyzed, then sometimes it has to be done.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that's
Thanks.
perfect. Thank you. And Corinne has an amazing gift for you guys. She has a 15-page healthy home checklist for inspecting and analyzing a home. So even if you're renting, if you're thinking about, you know, renting or buying, this is an amazing resource, and we're very grateful. Thank you so much, Corinne, for being here today with us and for sharing this gift with the audience.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.